Psy and Snoop Dogg vomit up a hit. China firmly controls its sea, and North Korea detains another American. I'm Steve Miller. These stories and more are on the June 13th edition of Asia News Weekly. Welcome to the show, everyone. This week our first story is an update from Vietnam. Last year, China unveiled its 9-dash line, effectively claiming the majority of the China Sea as their own. While the move ratcheted up tensions, by far the most contentious area right now is in the waters off the coast of Vietnam. On May 2nd, China moved an oil rig, protected by several ships, into the waters Vietnam claims as its own exclusive economic zone. Since its arrival off the Paracel Islands, Chinese ships have used ramming tactics to brush aside Vietnamese fishing boats and Coast Guard vessels, as I mentioned in our May 30th episode. In a move to solidify their position, China has increased the fleet around the oil rig to 120 as of June 8th. According to Vietnam's Bureau of Fisheries Inspection, these include 40 Coast Guard boats, 30 tugs and transport vessels, 35 to 40 fishing boats, and 4 warships. China says these are defensive measures in response to what it says are more than 1,400 sorties carried out by Vietnamese vessels. Despite pledging support to ASEAN partners, the United States is taking a measured approach and not opting to get directly involved. U.S. Department of State spokesperson Jen Psaki.
We encourage the sides to maintain dialogue with each other, but we're not going to weigh in on speculation about their location and what it means.
No one wishes for direct confrontation with China, but some have been working the international circuit to bring about widespread condemnation on the Asian giant. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe secured support not only from ASEAN members, but the G7 leaders as well, to try and resolve the matter through the rule of law. Quote, "There have been various moves in the East and South China Sea, and we've been sending a strong message that changing the status quo by force is unacceptable." End quote. While slow going, the global pressure on China seems to be working. On June 9th, China released a statement on the matter that detailed China's claim in the area. China's Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations, Wang Min, asked Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to circulate it among all members of the General Assembly. The diplomat's Zachary Keck speculates China released the statement to bolster its claims. He says by proactively raising the issue at an international body and outlining its claims of sovereignty, China is likely trying to dissuade Vietnam from acting on its threats to appeal to international law. This strategy seems evident from the statement's extensive outline of the basis for China's sovereignty claims, as well as its effort to link these claims to various international treaties, like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas. Wang Min further mentioned to the United Nations, "The Chinese government believes the most effective way to peacefully settle maritime disputes is negotiation and consultation between the parties directly involved in the dispute on the basis of respect for historical facts and international law. This is also what the majority of the countries did in successfully settling their own maritime disputes." Okay, so what does this all mean? The world wants all parties to sit down to resolve the matter, but China isn't having any of it, and has reaffirmed its commitment to only discuss disputes on a one-on-one basis. Vietnam's notion of taking the matter to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea has no real effect on the situation, since China isn't bound by its decisions. So where do we go from here? At this point, there really are just limited options. Of course, there's the military option, but Vietnam can't win a confrontation, so let's not even go there. The only viable solution will come from the diplomats. They need to get China to commit to binding discussions. The only way I see this happening is if members of the G7, preferably led by the United States, come forward and acknowledge the oil rig is in Vietnam's exclusive economic zone. The countries already adhere to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which usually defines an economic zone as one extending 200 nautical miles from the nation's shore. The oil rig does fall within that area. By going on the record of acknowledging Vietnam's territorial water claim, It will then put the onus on China to substantiate its own claim in further detail, something it hasn't yet done to international satisfaction regarding the 9-dash line. It would then hopefully galvanize concrete support for the ASEAN position. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. With China moving more ships into the area, does it increase the risk of confrontation? Will other nations back Vietnam's territorial water claim? And what are your predictions for the future? Please be sure to leave your thoughts on AsiaNewsWeekly.net, our Facebook page, or on Twitter. In just a few minutes, an update on China's war on terror. May 22nd saw Thailand enter its 12th coup. International condemnation of the action came swift, with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry saying there was no justification. But honestly, after 6 months of violence and protests, and the problem going nowhere but downhill, what was General Prayut Chan-o-cha left to do? Neither side was budging from their position, and the confrontations were spilling out into the street. The scene in Thailand made the congressional gridlock in Washington look desirable over the reality of the problem Thais had. So Prayut called a timeout and ordered everyone out of the pool. Since then, Acting Foreign Minister Sihasak Puangketkaw has been spreading the message the junta's actions weren't to seize power, but rather, quote, the situation at the time was a state of paralysis. Government wasn't functioning, politicians couldn't get their act together. If it had continued, it would have been detrimental to the country, to ASEAN, to all our partners, end quote. Tanan Kantong of The Nation in Bangkok wrote, so far, the situation remains calm. Strangely enough, foreign nations are more concerned about the coup than the Thai people themselves. King Prajatapok told the New York Times in the 1930s that the best political system was the one favored by the people of the country. In other words, only Thais know what system is best for them. As such, other nations should not undertake to provide a prescription for the Thai crisis, which is complicated, complex, and deep-rooted, and cannot be resolved by an early election. In due course, the crisis will come to an end. Thailand will learn from its past mistakes, and then be able to move forward again with a clear goal at its own pace. That doesn't mean it's smooth sailing for the junta, as anti-coup protests linger, complete with Hunger Games-inspired three-fingered salutes. It isn't something the military likes to see, and has actually clamped down on protests. And over the weekend, a planned protest brought about nearly 6,000 security officers. Last weekend, the general also assumed control as the head of the Board of Investment. It's a role usually held by the country's prime minister, which General Prayut is at the moment. Prayut is said to be reviewing several projects aimed at bolstering the stagnating economy, among them a water management plan and various infrastructure initiatives. Despite the protest and government reorganization, life in Thailand, for the most part, is calm. Twitter user Jay Duffy shared this via the social network. Just home from a night out on Koh Tao, everything is normal. Party all night. Now, his reports aren't unique, as most tourists in Thailand report the vacation scene has nearly returned to pre-coup levels. What Prayut needs to do is get the country back in order. To assume everything will be fixed in a matter of weeks is naive. This is going to be a long process, and one that really does need to take place. While the junta does appear to be heavy-handed in some situations, as I said before, it had to, as is evidenced by large weapon caches that have been uncovered. Now, we're talking machine guns, grenades, and RPGs that could have cost innocents their lives. The junta needs to facilitate the creation of a working government, where both sides feel secure and comfortable. So far, that does appear to be happening. What I'm actually more concerned about is what will happen to Thailand when the nation's beloved king passes away. Now, while the king is revered, the crown prince is not held in as high regards, and that could cause a bigger problem. If you take a moment to visit AsiaNewsWeekly.net, you can actually get the entire text for this week's episode, the links for all the articles, and of course a minute-by-minute rundown of when the stories appear in this episode. While you're there, I hope you'll take a moment to share your thoughts on the stories by leaving a comment in the comment section, on our Facebook page, or on Twitter. You'll find us at facebook.com/AsianNewsWeekly or at AsianNewsWeekly on Twitter. Attacks in the northwest region of Xinjiang have prompted China to initiate a year-long crackdown on insurgent groups, creating an internal war on terror. Last week, Chinese state media said 81 people have been sentenced thus far with charges of organizing and participating in terrorism, murder, and arson. 9 have been sentenced to death. The state-run Xinjiang Net website says those that were detained were from Urumqi, where an attack on a market killed 39. In May, Xinjiang held a rally for a public sentencing that found 55 people guilty of terrorism and related charges. Some in Xinjiang say Uyghurs, a mostly Muslim ethnic minority native to the area, is carrying out the attacks. Chinese officials state they are fighting foreign-backed separatists, while Uyghurs claim religious and cultural discrimination in favor of the Han majority. A guest on the Voice of America website left this comment: "What the Han do not understand about the situation in Xinjiang is that Uyghurs are discriminated daily in a multitude of ways that seem unbelievable to the Han. For instance, it is extremely difficult for a Uyghur to obtain a high-level job in a company run by Han. It's almost impossible for a Uyghur to obtain a passport or permission to leave the country. Hukus are hard for any Chinese to get, but are especially difficult for Uyghurs to obtain. Also, many Uyghurs feel their culture is being destroyed through the rebuilding of the West campaign. Kashgar is being rebuilt as a tourist center for Han. Signs are being built throughout Xinjiang only in Chinese characters, when the government knows the majority of adult Uyghurs only speak and read Uyghur in Arabic script. Children are not allowed to attend prayer until a certain age, and the list continues. Lastly, many Uyghurs believe the government businesses in Xinjiang are just there to extract minerals from the region and send them back east. There is not proper reinvestment back into the region." User Wangchuk added, "Since there is no due process of law or rule of law in China, there is no way to know whether any Uyghurs convicted are actually guilty of the crimes charged. Chinese police frequently use torture to extract confessions, which is illegal. But that doesn't stop the Chinese police. Uyghurs have rights under the PRC Constitution and international law, but the CCP ignores those rights and oppresses the Uyghur people. When people are oppressed, eventually they will rebel." Those comments are from the Voice of America users and are their own personal thoughts. However, they do demonstrate what many feel are the real issues in the area. 2 weeks ago, Chinese officials uncovered 1.8 tons of explosive materials that Uyghurs allegedly were planning to use for more attacks. If it is true that Uyghurs are backed so far into a corner that they feel violence is their only course of action, what can be done to defuse the situation? Chinese officials don't seem to be taking into account what the Uyghurs have to say, and in essence, leaves them no other option. Gerald Seymour wrote in 1975, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter," and the Uyghurs might just view the situation that way. But what do you feel about violent uprisings? In just a few minutes, a protest in Seoul against the 2014 Korea Queer Festival. It seems to be becoming a regular headline these days. North Korea detains tourist. Last week it was a South Korean missionary, and this week it's American Jeffrey Edward Fole. The DPRK says Fole committed hostile acts against the state, which appears to have been the heinous crime of leaving a Bible in a hotel room. The official statement read, quote, "The U.S. citizen who entered the DPRK on April 29th as a tourist engaged in activities that were in breach of the DPRK's laws." Fole is being depicted as an average guy who loves to travel, having previously visited war-torn Sarajevo as NATO peacekeeper, struggled to broker the established calm, and also to Russia, where he met his current wife after a year of correspondence. State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf told reporters, quote, "This is the third U.S. citizen that has been detained in North Korea. There's no greater priority for us than the welfare and safety of U.S. citizens abroad. Harf reiterated the State Department's travel advisory against North Korea and that being part of a tour group will not prohibit arrest. That's really the lesson to take away from this story. North Korea is a totalitarian state where things can change at a moment's notice and for no clear-cut reason. Even though the regime is attempting to bolster its tourism business, going there involves significant risk. That's why a decision to go there must be carefully weighed, and something like the North Korean travel app might be worth getting. Now, if you've never heard about that application, you can hear my interview with the developer in our Asia Now podcast dated May 12th. Personally, I would never go to North Korea as a tourist. It just holds absolutely no draw for me, and the money I'd be spending would actually end up funding the dictator. It's not something I want to do. Going there as part of an assignment for a news story, well, that's a different matter. In other North Korean news, Japan has now supplied to the DPRK a list of 470 citizens it believes the state kidnapped between the 1970s and the 1980s. North Korea has only admitted to abducting 13 people during that time, and North Korea did allow 5 to return about a decade ago and says that the others passed away. North Korea has agreed to reinvestigate Japan's claims, provided the Land of the Rising Sun drops several sanctions. It's something Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is actually willing to do, and I personally think it's the wrong course of action. North Korea took 30 years to admit it kidnapped 13 citizens, and Kim Jong-un still thinks himself as a powerful man, able to manipulate the West. Dropping the Japanese-specific sanctions for just promising to look at matters again is a huge win for the young leader. I don't see him coming clean about the fate of the alleged 457 missing. Sure, he might throw Japan a few bones as a sign of good faith, but Japan really shouldn't get their hopes up too high. Now, before we go on from this segment, I would really like you to share your opinion about traveling to North Korea. Earlier this week on Asia Now, I featured a story on Coca-Cola's efforts in Vietnam. The soda company unveiled a new program called Second Lives to get customers to hold on to their old plastic Coke bottles by handing out specialty tops. Some think it's a great program, while others consider it just another marketing ploy. You can hear the story on AsiaNewsWeekly.net, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Asia Now features stories, conversations, and news taking place in Asia now. So give it a listen and let me know what you think.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
A few years ago, almost no one outside of South Korea knew who Psy was. That all changed in 2012 when the singer released Gangnam Style. The single was an international success and catapulted the singer to megastardom. To date, the YouTube version has surpassed 2 billion views. And let me tell you, that is an incredible accomplishment. Psy followed that single up in 2013 with Gentleman. It was marginally successful, but nowhere near the levels that Gangnam Style reached. Which brings us to this week and the much anticipated song Hangover featuring Snoop Dogg.
Hangover, 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 hangover. Party's over.
Immediate reaction in South Korea was mixed. Some in the Korean media hoped it would be a hit, while many thought just the opposite. After seeing the video, I tweeted, "Two has-beens try to make magic happen in a gratuitous product placement video and fail." Now, if you're not living in Korea, you might not be able to pick up on the product placements, but the beer, soju, ramen, the energy drink are all endorsement deals Psy picked up after Gangnam Style. Travel blogger Alex Berger said, "Wow, that's brutally bad." Others, like Courtney Anna, thought Snoop Dogg's presence in the music video overshadowed the supposed Korean star of the show. The song is sure to go viral, not because it's good, but because Psy has so many YouTube subscribers and the buzz around the song leading up to the single's release will ensure a great play on air and a fantastic return on investment for all the products that featured heavily in the music video. Psy told the Korea Times his forthcoming album will mark a return to his roots, adding that his previous effort, Gentleman, just really wasn't me. Now, if this song is an example of what Psy is calling his roots, he'll probably be fading back into obscurity again. Blogger Michael Hurt wrote that after seeing the video, he had two predictions. One, Snoop walking through Korean scenes of life will get a lot of national pride play. And two, Koreans will debate about whether showing such scenes to non-Koreans will give a positive enough view of Korea, and some will protest the video saying that it embarrasses Korea. Now, Hurt brings up a good point. A lot of what Psy does is creating controversy by shining a light on Korean society. Gangnam Style was a reflection on the materialistic pursuit that is modern Korea. Hangover is an accurate depiction of Korean drinking life. The song says, "Drink till you're drunk, smoke like a broke stove, don't quit, take flight. I can't remember last night." It's a scene many Korea observers have actually witnessed. But what do you think about the man leading K-pop's wave's latest endeavor? Is Hangover a hit or is it a miss? Chime in on our website, Facebook page, or Twitter. South Korea is not a country I would consider friendly to members of the LGBT community. Some polls show Korea's younger generation generally accepting of homosexuality, while other polls show an over 70% view that it is abnormal. Some even feel homosexuality is still a disease, and one the West introduced to the nation. That being said, I was extremely pleased by the large turnout this past weekend in Sinchon, an area of Seoul where major universities are located and the home to the 15th annual Gay Pride Festival. The festival got the go-ahead from the city a few weeks ago, but permission was later revoked after the city bowed to pressure placed on it from various groups, stating that it was inappropriate to hold celebrations in the wake of the Sewol ferry tragedy. Religious groups not only protested the festival area, but also the United States Embassy for supporting the event. Signs and chants relayed intolerant messages like, "Repent, homosexuality is a sin," and "Our children must be raised within a moral culture," which I kind of find ironic considering the high infidelity rate. The Christian groups protesting the rally had no effect on those attending the festival. Riot police were there and made sure nothing got out of hand. Now, that was easy enough to do when the event was isolated along the street where the LGBT advocates had their booths set up. However, when it was actually time for the parade to start, Christian groups mobilized in force to oppose the celebratory walk, actually stopping their progress. It was truly a disgusting display of hate, trying to be portrayed as Christ's love. Now, slowly, South Korea is changing, as is its neighbor Japan. But in the 21st century, I find it sad that so many have to fight an uphill battle for basic rights, especially when elsewhere in Asia, attitudes on the subject are on the opposite side of the spectrum. While the parade has ended, the Korea Queer Film Festival runs through the 15th in Seoul. I grew up watching science fiction cartoons and television shows. Captain Kirk, Spock, Dr. McCoy, they were all staples at our table. In the morning, I followed the adventures of the space family Robinson, wishing one day for them to find their way home. And of course, let us not forget about the movie that changed everything, Star Wars. These future societies relied heavily on computers to complete everyday tasks. Kirk would sit down at his desk and simply ask the computer to do the research for him. Will Robinson's only friend while lost in space was the robot. And of course, the Empire would have never fallen if it hadn't been for R2-D2 and C-3PO. In fact, if we turn to the Jetsons, their Rosie the robot was as much part of the family as anyone else. So where am I going with all this? Here, SoftBank a major Japanese telecommunications company, recently unveiled Pepper the robot. According to its developers, the robot is designed to respond to its owner's moods and emotions. People may look back 100 years later, or 200 years later, and say that was a historic moment we're having today, said Masayoshi Son, SoftBank's CEO. The robots are about 120 centimeters tall and weigh about 28 kilograms. Using cameras and facial recognition software, Pepper observes its owner and adjusts its behavior. The data is also uploaded to a central storage facility where other units can retrieve it to augment their own programming. Now, while I certainly see the benefit of crowdsourced learning, immediate privacy concerns crop up as to how the information will be collected, stored, and disseminated. We already have tales of hackers getting into personal computers and turning on webcams to spy on people. Would they be able to do this with Pepper? Currently, Pepper speaks 17 different languages and simply tries to make you happy, says Kaname Hayashi, SoftBank's project manager. Son envisions a time where Pepper is a staple of the home, providing companion services or completing menial tasks since the robot moves about on wheels and has articulated arms. And it comes at a price point of just under $2,000. And it may very well happen. This low price also brings up an interesting notion as to what kind of programming might be available with these robots. In South Korea, the Education Ministry has floated the idea of using robots in the classroom before, ultimately replacing the native English speakers. If robots like Pepper could be programmed with instructional materials, their emotional responses could be helpful when students are having difficulty learning, and then they could implement further educational exercises. At only $2,000 per unit, it presents itself as a powerful and cost-effective educational aid. Now, we seem to be approaching an age of personal robotics. With Pepper's planned cloud-based computing and camera recording data, is it inviting Big Brother into our homes on an unprecedented scale? Now, I personally like the idea of a giant Furby following me around the house, able to converse with me and carry out simple tasks, but not if every aspect of my life has the potential to be recorded and stored. Look at the furor Microsoft faced with Kinect on the Xbox One. This would take things to a whole new level. But let me hear your thoughts. What do you think? Is this a great new advancement, or are privacy concerns warranted? Let me know your thoughts in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. Well, my friends, that'll do it for this week's stories, but before I get to your comments from last week, I'd like to give a shout out to my fellow Seoul-based podcast, Cafe Seoul Podcast. It's an hour-long round-table discussion, a little bit on the lighter side, about news and pop culture taking place in Seoul. Now, you can find the Cafe Seoul Podcast on iTunes. Now, for your comments, from August Hayuk, what a rubbish comment by South Korea. It was them who has started excluding Japan from North Korea issues in various important meetings with US and China all of a sudden for stupid reasons that they fabricated. They are making this issue all by themselves out of nothing. They are behaving just like China. Now, again, many of you also commented from our Asia Now story about the Coca-Cola bottle caps that I included a teaser for earlier in this episode. Now, the story took place in Vietnam and, of course, throughout Asia, and most of you said that the bottle tops themselves were a fantastic idea, and you actually hoped that they would become available in other parts of the world. And many actually mentioned that you were actually doubtful that the program would reduce waste. Now, one last comment from Twitter user Be Forever Grateful. I'm sorry. I just don't believe flight MH370 crashed into the ocean. If it crashed at all, I think it would be on land in a remote area. Those are some great comments, and as always, I do welcome you to leave your comments either on our website, our Facebook wall, or tweet me through Twitter. You can always reach us at either of those sites, and it's fantastic when I hear from you. Now, that is it for this week, so thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for downloading the podcast. You can always listen to the podcast at asiannewsweekly.net, We're available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and of course, TuneIn. If you have any feedback for the show, I would love to hear from you. You can send me an email at podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. One more item of business. There actually won't be any more episodes of Asian News Weekly during the month of June. I'll be tied up with other business. However, as news stories do develop, I will be sharing them on Twitter at Asian News Weekly, on our Facebook page, and of course, if something really interesting comes up, we'll be creating a special Asia Now podcast. Well, that is it. I've been Steve Miller, and until next time, stay true to yourself and always be awesome. Asian News Weekly is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.